So I was gonna do a quick video today about business cards because it was an interesting thread on Facebook. Maybe I'll do that later. But as I got in my car, I remembered a question somebody had asked me because the actual situation occurred. They said, how do you find inspiration for your lighting, like how to light things, right? So I think part of that, of course, and this is often what I teach on the videos, is you need to be fairly technically sound to do it the way that I'm about to say, but because you need to be able to create the light that you're thinking of in the moment. But oftentimes, there's two major ways. One is I just see something that's interesting. This often happens when I'm like in the subway or I'm in a store or somebody's leaning against a wall, an interesting light, or, when I see that and I kind of think about it in my head and I'm like, okay, that kind of is interesting. And then, of course, using the knowledge that I have, just through experience of shooting, I can look at it and be like, well, I can create something similar to that by, I don't know, using a softbox or whatever. And that's kind of where I kind of catalog stuff in my head. So when I see somebody and I want to make a photo of them, and I'm thinking about how to light them, I refer back to these images in my head of things I saw. And it's kind of like, oh, that outfit they're wearing, or the place that I'm going to put them, or the vibe that I want to give is reminiscent to me of, a moment that I had when I was walking in the streets in Brooklyn or whatever, and, there was some light glinting off a building, and it kind of reflected in the person's hair, and I then create that light for that moment, right? So that's basically it. I mean, that's the most basic way, and the thing that I probably do the most. But the other thing that kind of inspires me beyond that, like if I'm going to think, I'm going to go shoot something that I can create from scratch, what is it that I want to make? And where I usually find inspiration for that, say 90% of the time, is in music. Music and writing. Basically, the lyrics of music is what I should say. Things that are evocative in a way that makes you immediately think to yourself and put yourself in that situation. So, songs that are very descriptive, or story songs, and things like that. But the reason why this suddenly came up now is because I got in my car and a song by Bob Seger came on the radio called "Turn the Page," and I'm probably getting the lyrics not exactly right, but it's something to the effect of, on a long and lonesome highway east of Omaha, you can listen to the engine moaning out its one note in song, right? So what's going on here? Now, of course, in context, you know that he's a singer, he's on tour maybe, what's the light coming through the tour bus window, what's it like in there for this person? Like, what's that moment, right, where they're sitting on this bus, just looking out the window in the middle of, basically nowhere to them. What's the emotion there? What's what's drawing you in, right? And then I think to myself, I create that image in my head, and I think, I can do that. I can create light that I would imagine coming through a window at a certain time of day, or maybe at night, It's very directional, it falls off, maybe it's shallow focus, there's not a lot going on, it's close, the person's leaning in towards the window, they've got the light coming across them. And this then creates in my head, I want to make that shot. I'm going to create that picture. It's not exactly that picture, but that's the picture, right? So what I used to do is when I would hear something really cool, like a cool lyric or a cool thing in my head, I would just keep a notebook and I would just write it down. I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. I could do that. And I would go from there. So I think there's a lot of, music out there. If you look for people that create music that's more visual in how they explain things, then you can seek these moments out in your own mind, so you kind of close your eyes and listen to the song and the lyrics, and from there you envision it yourself. Now, of course, I'm combining the two things at this moment, right? Because I go back in my memory and I think, have I ever been on a long drive? Have I been in a bus before? Have I been, in the subway? Have I been in the backseat of a car when I was a kid, looking out the window, or watching, my family or whatever? And then I can pull those visuals from my past to create what I want to do, in the image. So that's one way that I do it. I think it's super simple. You just need to be, in both cases, the first thing and the second thing I said. You just need to be aware. And I think being aware is a big part of being a photographer, you know, whether you're doing street photography and you're running around and whatever, or you're just out there. You know, I'm often just looking at people, you know, looking at people and looking at things. I'm kind of seeing and creating this library of visual cues in my brain so that when the time comes that I need to create something, I have something to pull from. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. And what I will say is if you're stuck and somebody's in front of you and you don't really know what to do, go back to the basics. You know, if I don't know what to do and I have somebody in front of me, I'm always going to go with what I know kind of works first. And then I'll kind of drift off to other things as I go. So hopefully that's helpful. You know, find what inspires you. Read. It could be poetry. It could be novels. It could be TV, right? It could even be you're watching TV shows that are really interesting. But what I'll say is that you're not going to be creating, if you're watching a movie, let's say, you're not going to be creating this massive special effect necessarily, but there's moments and times that you can pull from. I find movies and TV to be interesting, though more difficult, because the lighting for video is a lot different. You know, you can really get away with, you know, having the shadows completely cover the eyes and doing stuff like that in a movie because that fits the scene at that moment. Typically, in a single still, you're not going to want to do that if you're photographing a person. So look at that stuff, but also think about context, because what works in a movie is not necessarily going to work for you, but at least you can get the vibe of it, like maybe just the directionality of the light and then clean it up, the colors they use. I was actually I just finished the second season of Luke Cage. I think it was second season. Anyways, and there's a scene, no spoilers, and he's basically sitting outside, and there's some lights, some, you know, police or whatever lights, and they're in the scene at some point, you know, and then after that, when you're in close to them, you can see in the highlights of his skin that he's got this like kind of red on one side and kind of blue, and that's the callback, right? That's the callback to the fact that there's, you know, police activity around. And since you're making a single still and you can't necessarily show a police car because you don't have it, but you want to have that vibe in your shot, that's one way to do it, right? You add that subtle hint of color, and that informs people that that thing is there. So, again, looking for those moments, you can kind of build up your vocabulary or whatever of lighting. So, hopefully that's helpful. If you don't already, like and subscribe, blah, blah. And I'll see you next time, guys.